So please welcome Jenny Odell and Mina to Climate One.
Hi. Oh, Jenny, hearing that introduction and thinking about saving time, I was actually thinking about before you wrote Saving Time and thinking about where were you? What were you thinking and feeling with regard to the climate crisis, several years back?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of stuff in How to Do Nothing about attention. So I think I ended on this kind of note of paying attention to the world around you. At some point I used the phrase to behold is to become beholden to. And so I think I landed in this place of I'm deeply in love with these things that I'm observing. I talk about bioregionalism, but with that comes a sense of responsibility. And also dread. Like I talk about going to Elkhorn Slough and seeing all of the birds and crying because I'm thinking about how vulnerable it all is. So there's that kind of like love, but also grief and dread. And then on the other hand, I was also thinking a lot about someone who maybe reads How to Do Nothing and agrees with the ideas, but just doesn't have time, doesn't have control over their time, just doesn't have the resources to inhabit this contemplative state of mind. And so time, in both of these scenarios, I think like time feels like the enemy in a way, like, and it was like it existed as a thorn in my side for quite a while. And then it became like an interesting thorn. And then I was like, oh, maybe like this is actually time is the thing that I need to think about directly and try to write about.
Yeah, I really related to that dread and thinking about that dread and its relationship to time. And I was so grateful when Climate One asked me to talk with you about it because it does feel very much of the moment. One of the other things that I really related to in Saving Time was your description of that day that we probably all remember when the sky turned orange and it made national news and it felt dark and apocalyptic and it gave you nightmares, right?
Yeah, I wrote about just I'm sure I'm not alone. I had many nightmares about fires, people running away from fires, like me running away from fires. And I also include some journal entries in that chapter of just this like total sense of like an inability to see even a horizon, it's not even like I have a problem with the future. I can't even imagine the future. And I feel like that day, just even visually, kind of encapsulated that feeling where you could not even see into the distance. Yeah.
You described it as your nightmares as an internalization of declinism. What is declinism? What did you mean by that?
My understanding of it is that it's just kind of like the sense that you're strapped into the end, right? Like it's almost like a feeling of like get it over with, and that what you're looking at in the future is a decline. That there's no sort of negotiation about that. It's very linear, and I think what's crucial for me to understand about that is the way that the time appears between now and that future. It's sort of empty, right? It's like looking across like a flat desert with nothing in it. Of course, there's no such thing as that. But, like looking into the distance and you're like, well, soon I will be over there. But you're imagining that you over there are you now. Like you're sort of like putting yourself over there, whereas like the truth is there are many things that happen on the way there. I think conversations are another really good example. If anyone here has ever tried to like plan a conversation that they were going to have with someone, it's like it never goes that way. And the reason it doesn't go that way is because the person's responding to you, so like you actually are changing throughout the conversation. And it's like absolutely true that there are things that we know are going to happen. There's a direction that things are going in, but that's not the same thing as being able to tell the future.
So that's why you were saying that declinism, you said, is probably one of the more dangerous forms of linear, deterministic time reckoning that there is.
Yeah, because it leaves no room for agency, for creative response. I mean, humans have done terrible things on this planet, but we also are full of ingenuity. And so there are, I think there is there is a danger in seeing things as so linear that you are closing down all of those responses. And as I write about in that chapter, no one loves declinism more than fossil fuel companies. So yeah,
Because
because they are very invested in the only possible future being one in which we continue burning fossil fuels in the same way.
yeah. And then also that inability to really have agency creates a sense of nihilism, right?
Yeah, like there is no longer any reason to do anything. There is no reason to try to imagine anything different. It just really, I think, like closes down a sense of possibility, and it's very different from an understanding of time in which no moment is the same and each moment holds some kind of possibility. I mean, if you think, I always find it very inspiring to go backwards and think about all of the people who are fighting against odds, really tough odds, for things that we take for granted now. And if you were to go and talk to that person then, they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know if what they were doing was going to work. I mean, what if they were declinists, right? Like, what would our lives be? So I always find that a helpful thought experiment.
Yeah. So then in some ways, was saving time a way to kind of save yourself from declinism, like writing saving time or looking for alternative ways of conceptualizing time?
Yeah, maybe I should have called it saving myself. No, the title saving time, like I think what I was really, in a related way trying to do is like rescue a different feeling or sense of time from what we are all more familiar with, which is a very linear sense of time, both in the sense of declinism, but also in the sense of like the clock and like labor hours and time as a resource to be squeezed. So I was really kind of I was looking for other reckonings of time that could be helpful for thinking about the future.
So where did you find it? I mean, not surprisingly, it was in nature, but talk a little bit about some of the ways that you found it in nature.
So I talk a lot in How to Do Nothing about birds, and so there are some more birds in this book, but geology also ended up being a really big piece of this for me, and really I use this phrase in the book, unfreezing something in time, which just means to choose a place or an organism or just something finite and put your attention on that, which a lot of people involuntarily did during the pandemic. And it's that allows you to see change. There's an artist, there's an artist, Andy Goldsworthy, who I just saw a documentary on, and he says that traveling shows you difference, but in order to see change, you have to stay in one place, which I thought was really interesting. And so in the book, I actually end up choosing this one branch of a California buckeye tree, which is my favorite kind of tree. And I chose one that it was sticking out furthest towards the trail, so I could always see it. I pass this tree hundreds of times. And if anyone here is familiar with the schedule of the buckeye tree, it goes dormant in the summer. So there's a period of time, it's actually right now, when a lot of things are happening with this tree. It's like growing a flowering stalk. The little flowers are opening kind of one by one. Every day, something about that branch looks different. It seems so simple, but I think it's worth emphasizing that, like, that is what time is. Like, at the end of the day, it's just like, it's life. It's just things that are changing. And so anywhere you look, you can actually, we're surrounded by illustrations of this other kind of time. And so for me, it really was, especially because it was written during the pandemic, it was these kind of really minute, happenings in the non-human world.
Yeah, I can see how the existence of other timescales could be really comforting, though at the same time, it could probably also be kind of disconcerting.
Yeah, it's both. I mean, I always think about, it's not in the book, but at Fort Funston, there's like a stripe of white that goes, through the cliff. It's very obvious if you're standing on the beach, and that is ash from an ancient volcanic eruption up near Lassen.
Wow.
And it's part of the cliff, so it's crumbling like the rest of the cliff. You can pick up a piece of this ash and just hold it in your hand. And like when you think about what you're really holding, right? Like that too is time, right? Like that it's not a symbol of the past. Like that is actually the ash from that time.
With so many ways to conceptualize time, with so many examples around us of different timescales, how did we get to this point where we created essentially a clock and tried to delineate it numerically?
Yeah, so I will just say that's a very depressing history. And if you read Saving Time, I promise that it gets happier after chapter 1. But it was a sobering thing to look into. But essentially, I mean, the story of like clock time is very much bound up with the history of buying and selling labor time, as well as colonization. There's a great book called The Colonization of Time that I really recommend, and I really, really drew a lot from for that part of the book, where the author is talking about British colonists going to places that obviously have a fully developed sense of time. It's not clock time. It's more kind of attentiveness to seasons, like what happens when, which is like very much tied to survival. Like you have to do things at the right time. And coming in and having to impose, ideas like the 9-to-5 workday essentially, or like labor hours, the sort of sense of regularity, and also, seeing humans as like resources for labor. And so, everywhere you look in the sort of history of clock time, it's impossible to actually extricate it from, the history of what has gone wrong with the climate, which is like extraction, like an extractionist mindset. So I think something that really was helpful for me in writing it that I discovered partway through is that what I'm really talking about is languages of time. And when I started out, I think I may have written in my book proposal that I wanted to think about clock time as an invasive species of time. And I think it is, but it's also a language. It's like an invasive language of time. And it was really interesting to go back and see that it had this origin and then it spread literally geographically to these other places through the exploitation of people and resources. And now it's just kind of like the lingua franca, that it's what we're all used to. It's like the language that we all speak about time, but we also still know other languages.
Yeah. It was really great to get the reminder that there were so many places, cultures, and people who had nothing to do with that way of thinking about time or delineating your day, that so many existed, and that you're right, as you say, it has this very distinct, intended purpose in terms of colonization in the 19th century. I want to ask you about what you just said about how this type of way of thinking about delineating and basically using time as extractive in the sense of people's labor, but also extractive in the sense of the earth. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think that it's, if time is money as a language, it's also part of a worldview. And it's a worldview in which, people are resources to be exploited. The earth is a resource to be exploited. The earth is inert. It doesn't kind of show up, I think, as an agent. In this kind of worldview, it's something, it doesn't participate. And it's not something that has rights. It's not something you can have an encounter with. And so I think that is part of the reason why those histories are so intertwined. It's like everywhere that you see this kind of exploitation happening and the language of extraction, it's always both, right? It's like exploitation of labor and resources. Like it's part of the same logic of how one encounters the world outside of oneself.
Yeah, and then that essentially, we'll talk a little bit more about, you're alluding to this, but the direct line, how that draws a direct line to the climate crisis. I imagine part of it is just you start ignoring the natural rhythms of the earth, for example.
Yeah, and I think it's also very presentist, right? It's I don't know, it was really strange. I quoted some meeting minutes from a BP shareholder meeting, I think, where they're talking about some offshore drilling thing, and they're talking about it being on schedule. And there's something about it being on schedule, and it's the casualness. I think someone calls the CEO Bernie or Burn. It's just very oh yeah, it's just sort of very business as usual. And we're on schedule, and you're oh right, we're on that schedule. That's a very particular schedule that's it's hard to imagine where someone talking in that way thinks this is going, so it's also about a time horizon. The time horizon of extraction is very much closer to us, right? And versus the sort of like, all of the things that have happened, all of the cultures that have existed, and like trying to imagine continuing to exist is like a very different way of thinking about the natural world, and it's also a different way of thinking about time and responsibility.
How has that time is money mindset, that extractive mindset, also stunted our ability to respond to climate change or the climate crisis?
Well, I think, I said earlier that it takes away a sense of agency. I find that's something that I still think about every day, and I'm still trying to write about, honestly. I think like anything that threatens our sense of that our actions matter is extremely dangerous, because like that is exactly what we need right now. So the sense that we're locked in, the future is sort of has been painted already, that like actively saps like energy and imagination from people in the sense that they have any kind of agency. And I also think it's extremely isolating. I think that I don't know, at least in my experience, like the times that I have felt that feeling the most acutely, I also feel very alone, even in the company of other people. Like we're all kind of here together, but we're just all heading in the same direction. We're not quite together. And so I think for me, what's really important about the sense of possibility in time is the sense of possibility that emerges when you do things with others, things that you can't imagine doing alone, or just like even the imagination part you can't do by yourself. And so I think there's something about that linear sense of time that it can force you to sort of like shut down and sort of stop looking around and start like trying to imagine a response to the moment that you're in.
Do you also think it stops us from, I don't know if trusting each other is right, to work collectively towards something, but I'm thinking about how we constantly have messages that are telling us, don't waste your time, protect your time, right? Spend it with the people who are worthy of your time. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's one of the chapters in my book is kind of like a critical reading of like hustle culture, like I call them productivity bros. And one of them literally says, you wouldn't leave your wallet out on a table, so why would you just give people your time? And he tells you to write the number 1440 and put it above your door, because that's how many minutes you have in a day. Like it's just, so like this idea of this resource like slipping through your fingers, and why wouldn't you protect it? And later on in the book, I contrast that with an experience that I had with a friend of mine who's a gardener, and she's trying to give me some lettuce because I didn't understand this as someone who didn't garden. She needs to get rid of them so that the plant will continue to grow in the way that she wants. And I just could not compute, like if you give me more, you have more. And it made me realize like how broken like my mental mechanisms were for understanding anything that's not a zero-sum game. And so later on, I think that same day, she also gave me some beans from a bean farm that doesn't exist anymore. And we were talking about it, and she knew I was working on the book, and I was trying to find a different metaphor for time that wasn't money. And we're like, maybe time is beans, which sounds silly, but beans contain the past and the future. And she told me that she had given these beans to people. She bought them 20 years ago. She'd given them to people that gave them to other people. Now she couldn't get them anymore, but now she was getting them back from those people, right? So like, if you think about time less as this like, I don't know, it's like this idea that every day I wake up, I have a box that's filled with 24 cubes, and then I gave you one, and now I have one fewer. It's like actually the truth is that someone might have done something in a moment with you like years ago, and now it's growing like in your life. And that's a very different way of thinking about interacting with people, or like what you get out of like, a certain amount of time.
Yeah. One of the things that you sort of discover is that if you can think about climate change as a present issue rather than a future one, that it can help reduce your climate dread. How does that work?
Yeah, one thing that I noticed, I think particularly when I was writing about my nightmares about that day, was that there was often in those dreams, it was like there was a wall of fire in the distance. And it was coming, and it's like we all know it's coming, and it's like it's nightmare, so you're powerless to do anything about it. But I think the interesting thing about that was that it had not yet arrived, even though we all know that this has arrived, But there's this feeling that it's somehow still the way it's talked about or the way it's felt sometimes feels like it's this wall that's coming towards you.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe paired also with like an avoidance of seeing the effects around you that are happening because it's too painful. Like things like I'm a birder. I live near Lake Merritt. I have noticed fewer ducks, of certain species that I really love, and it's hard to, maybe I'd rather like walk past that and not think about it. But there's also a relief in a weird way of sort of touching down there and being like, okay, this is happening. This is happening around me. It's happening in a material way. Maybe there is some way that I can respond to this situation that's happening around me, and like, no, that's not going to solve the climate crisis, but it is an action. It is doing something. It's often, I think, bringing you together with other people. And I've been really inspired recently by volunteering on a native plant restoration project for the last year in the East Bay, and really struck by there are these days where everyone shows up and is so heartbroken, like right now especially, and yet this project has been quite successful. And there are, we always talk about there's different parts. There's like the year 5 area and the year 3, and you can see a future that's actually better within that site. Like we did this work and things flourished and things responded. They often responded in ways that were unexpected. Like it's very humbling, right? It's also this reminder that you do things and you actually don't know how they're going to turn out, and they could turn out worse, but they could turn out better than you expected. And it's also, gives you respect for the things that are growing up there as respondents. Like they are alive, they are responding to things that you're doing. So, it's a very particular kind of position to be in. And that has been really, I think, like in the most dismissive way to think about it is like it's just a balm, to go up there. But I think there is something else happening there.
Something about, well, when you were saying that it's so painful to sometimes remember what was, do you feel like nostalgia can actually also stunt our ability to address climate change?
Yeah. Oh, I think so. Yeah. I write about in the book about as a kid, when my parents and I would drive up north, I would see these sort of endless mountains of forests, and I would think as a child, like, this must be how it's always been. And I was talking to someone about this recently, that like, I think maybe in California, because of deforestation, we think of like forests as like always kind of getting eaten away at or something. Like the forest is the thing, and then there's like some things threatening it. But when I did more research into it for the book, I went to an online meeting with an indigenous fire ecologist who was talking about how many more prairies there used to be up there that were maintained for hunting and for other reasons. And that actually, to her, when she looks at those mountains, she says, like, imagine if you left your yard unattended for 10 years and looked at it, how would you feel? That's how we feel when we look at this. So there's kind of like, there is something about nostalgia that usually, like, I feel like it takes from a point in time and then just extrapolates outward from that. And like, that's how things were and that's how they can never be again. But the truth is that things have been changing for all of history and been going back and forth, and in ways that I think when you kind of like unlock that a little bit and see that everything has always been this set of moving parts, I think it makes the future look a little more like that and a little bit less like flat.
Yeah. The other thing that when you mentioned earlier about realizing that the creation of the clock was a point in time, that, as much as you can create something that has influence, it also means you can kind of uncreate it. Like the future is not predetermined, it's not inevitable. I think maybe something might also be operating there in the garden that you're talking about too.
Yeah, I think that as much as, things in the natural world can be an illustration of that time has changed, they also, for me, have been an illustration of like hope, basically, because it's like this idea that you actually don't know what's going to happen. And also just on some, very basic level, like a sense of traction, right? Like there's something to me very different about, sitting and scrolling in silence, like alone, just feeling completely crushed by this feeling versus like actually just being embedded in something again with other people. I feel like that is just as a stance to be in right now is more, it feels more tenable to me.
Yeah. As you have been able to find and investigate and recognize all these other ways of living in time, or time scales, how has that affected, how you create your art or write now? Has it had a lasting effect on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm writing a book right now about repair, and so I think that kind of grows directly out of where I ended up in saving time was this. The book literally ends with me sort of like looking at this purple ochre sea star up north and near Seattle, and again being kind of like it's so beautiful, it's so vulnerable. There's sea star wasting syndrome had been observed in that area, around that time. And just this like sort of, I think I use the word desperate, like I'm desperate for this future, and where the person reading this does know what a purple ochre sea star looks like and has encountered one. And so I think I would describe it as like, how to do nothing is like, you're like it's the stopping, you're paying attention. And then now that you've paid attention in the next book, right, you learn to sort of see a different kind of time. And maybe hopefully are able to sort of imagine the future more. And then you get to like, that's where I am now, kind of writing about like really then responding and thinking about repair as something that's not necessarily putting things back the way they were. Like repair can make something better than it ever was. And there are many, many material examples of that, both ecological and just in the realm of like your household items. And so thinking about like repair as a mindset, as something that we could inhabit right now, that could be like sort of the way that you feel, what you feel your job is in the world.
Given the way that capitalism, ties productivity to self-worth, or the fact that, sort of an extractive recommendation, I guess, or requirement, but also just the fact that we live in this time, right? We do live in, we need to make a living, we live in this practical reality. How do we start to disentangle those things? This idea of time is money, this idea that productivity is self-worth.
Yeah, I think that honestly, even just like, and I know it's harder and harder to come by, but like taking any kind of pause, even just like, for one moment in the day, and kind of trying to zoom out a little bit. I mean, I think that's what I'm trying to do in the book, is zoom out from the assumptions and the language that we use to describe time, to think about what you really want. I mean, Oliver Berkman has written a really great book about that, 4,000 Weeks. But I think that for most people, thinking about that in any kind of sustained way, you realize that what you want is probably, whatever, I'm speaking for myself, not necessarily more stuff, right? Like whether that refers to actual stuff, or more achievements, or more work, or more like return on investment for your time, more friends, more success, right? But that is like the culture that we live in, and that's the assumption, is that you're supposed to, keep doing that. And I think when you actually turn around and examine that, at least for me, what I find that I really want is encounter. And I use that word a lot in the book, this sort of the encounter that doesn't add to your life, it changes your life. Like when you think about really good conversations that you've had with friends, or like things that you've seen in the world, things that you've read, where I always describe it as like you have to sit on a bench and think about your entire life from beginning to end in light of this new thing that you've encountered. Like to me, that is my measure of success, and that is what I want to have in my life, as opposed to just accumulating, accumulating without thinking about what the accumulation is for.
Yeah. Wow, that would be a lot. It would be hard for me, I think, to say.
Yeah, easier said than done.
All the ways of my. Okay, anyway, yeah. But there is something that you do write about that I have actually found as one way that maybe will help me disentangle these things. You wrote this afterword for Living Mountain about the Santa Cruz Mountains, and about creating a relationship and investing the kind of energy and attention that we do in relationships with people to a place. Could you talk about that experience for you, and why I think the Santa Cruz Mountains is that place for you? Yeah.
So I grew up in the Bay Area, and so I grew up going to the Santa Cruz Mountains, and I still live in the Bay Area, so I still make it out there, now and then. And it's really because of that lasting relationship, I really think of that particular region of the mountains as a person. When I go there, I feel like I'm visiting a person. I'm sure I'm not alone. Like many people have this kind of relationship with a place. That's just like the one you would have with a friend, where your relationship goes through stages. You both change. Things mean different things over different periods of time. But as that goes on, the sense of like identification and responsibility gets so deep that I think it just brings forth like a sense of responsibility that you don't even have to think about. Like it's the way that you would feel towards another person.
Yeah. Well, Jenny, thank you. That has been something for me that I feel like it covers so many things, because when you do develop that relationship with a place, and especially if that place is a place that can demonstrate for you a really different time scale, you've got that ability to have this alternate time scale as you're living in this existing time scale that's demanding you to be at a certain place at a certain time and hit all your posts.
And I mean, I would also add, Robin Wall Kimmerer writes a lot about things in the natural world as teachers. And I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind right now, and with a sense of humility, right? There are places that can be teachers. They can not only give you a sense of hope and, like I can do this another day, but it can actually actively teach you things that you don't know.
And then create that sense of responsibility that gets people to act, that feels, as you say, so natural. And of course you would do this. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.